Welcome. Tonight, we invite you to settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let the noise of the day fall gently away and ease into a quiet journey through time. Here on Boring History for Sleep, we explore the forgotten rhythms of the past stories, shaped not by excitement or spectacle, but by the steady beat of daily life, the slow turn of empires, and the soft footsteps of people long gone. If you find comfort in this kind of storytelling, if history helps calm your mind, we invite you to gently like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps others discover this peaceful corner of YouTube, and it lets us keep bringing you calm, quiet histories every week. Now, tonight's episode takes us to ancient China, to a fractured land caught in the final days of the Han Dynasty, to a man remembered not for peace, but for chaos. His name was Labu, but before we dive into his story of betrayal, power, and downfall, we begin not in the courts of the powerful, but among the forgotten, because to understand the rise of a feared warrior, we must first understand what life was like for those beneath his command. And so, as your breathing slows and your eyes grow heavy, imagine yourself not as a ruler, but as a soldier. Segment 1. Why it sucked to be a soldier in ancient China. Imagine this. You're standing in a field somewhere in northern China. It's early morning. The mist is thick, clinging low to the ground like an old blanket. Your boots crudely stitched from coarse hide squish softly into damp, uneven soil. Around you, the silence is broken only by the soft snort of a tethered horse and the occasional creak of armor settling in the cold. You are not a commander, not a warlord, not a hero. You're a soldier, or at least something that resembles one. You weren't trained at an academy. You weren't groomed for battle. More likely, you were a farmer or a laborer, conscripted when the local magistrate needed bodies to fill ranks. You may have owed grain taxes. Perhaps your village couldn't pay, so they took you instead. Your name doesn't matter to the men shouting orders. Your face will be forgotten by sunset. And still, you wake, you march, you endure. The camp around you is not orderly. It's a scattered patchwork of lean-tos, threadbare tents, and piles of straw that barely count as bedding. There is no fire smoke draws attention, and warlords don't like attention unless they're the ones giving it. You've been wearing the same tunic for days, weeks, even. It smells of sweat, mildew, and the constant dust of the road. Your breath smells too. There's no mint, no soap. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll find a stream at the next stop and splash water over your arms and face, just enough to keep the lice at bay. Meals are, well, calling them meals might be generous. This morning it's millet again boiled into a mush that sticks to your wooden bowl and your ribs. Some soldiers call it soldier's glue. It tastes like wet parchment, but it's warm and it's something. On the rare occasion that meat is served, it's usually scavenged stringy cuts from a stolen pig or mystery game caught in a snare. Nothing wasted, everything chewed. Your gear is mismatched, a helmet that doesn't quite fit, a breastplate tied over a faded cotton tunic. Many soldiers wear no armor at all, only thick jackets, stiff with layers of dried mud and sweat. You have a short sword, maybe, or a long-handled spear. If you're lucky, the blade is only slightly rusted. And if you're not lucky, you carry a stick with a sharpened point and hope to pry a better weapon from a fallen man. The day begins with movement, marching, always marching, not down smooth roads, but across rough trails, muddy fields, and rocky outcrops. Your feet ache by noon. The blisters are constant companions. You can feel the heat rising through the soles of your shoes, soft, dry heat that promises cracked skin and swollen toes by nightfall. The sun climbs, and with it the weight of your pack. You carry everything you own: a bedroll, a spare shirt, a whetstone, maybe a charm or trinket from home. Most of your gear isn't standard issue, it's handed down, traded, scavenged. Your water skin is patched, your sandals are fraying, your left shoulder aches from a poorly balanced pack, and you walk. You walk past burned-out villages, past empty fields where crops once grew, past corpses, sometimes bodies left where they fell. Your captain tells you not to look, but you do. You always do. Sometimes the march ends early, when the sun is still high and the camp is pitched under a wide sky. Sometimes it doesn't end at all. Night marches are the worst. You stumble in the dark, relying on the footsteps ahead of you. You wrap a strip of cloth around your hand to muffle the sound of your sword tapping against your hip. Silence is survival, and even in silence, you fear what might be out there. Bandits, ambush, other armies. Your world is a tight circle of light and shadow. When camp is made, it's crude and temporary. There's no time for walls, no time for comfort. You spread your blanket over the driest patch you can find and pray the bugs leave you alone. There is no privacy, no quiet, just the constant shuffle and cough of exhausted men lying too close together, bound by duty and fear. Then, sometimes, there's battle. But don't think of battle as a clash of great heroes. It's not poetry, it's not the stories old men tell. It's noise and smoke and heat. It's dust in your mouth, the sting of sweat in your eyes, and the scream of a man you might have eaten with the night before. You are told when to charge. You are told where to stand. Sometimes you understand why. Sometimes you don't. And when it's over, when the last arrow falls and the shouting stops, the silence feels heavier than any armor. Some men are dead, others are missing. You're still breathing, but your hand shakes. You try to clean your blade, but your tunic is already soaked. You close your eyes. You remember your village, a face, a song, a meal. Then the shouting begins again, and the moment is gone. Between battles, there's still no rest. You dig trenches. You carry water. You build siege equipment. You bury the dead. The days blur. The months vanish. No one writes your name in the histories. You may fight for a lord like Lull or against him. You may not know. Soldiers rarely do. To you, they're all the same faces atop horses, barking orders through polished helmets. Men with gold-threaded robes and clean hands. You are not one of them, but there are moments, small ones. Someone shares a rice ball from home. A bird lands nearby and sings. You repair a broken sandal with wire and laugh at how clever you are. These are the things that keep you going. That and the promise of survival. Because at the end of it all you want is to survive, to see your home again, to sleep in your own bed, to walk a road not lined with spears, but very few do. And those who lead you, those whose names filled the scrolls, they are remembered. Lull was one of them, feared by his enemies, admired for his strength, condemned for his betrayals. The name still echoes centuries later. And so we turn our attention to him, a man whose life, for all its legend, began much the same as yours, with a sword and a choice. Segment 2. The Life and Death of Lu Bu. Let us now turn our gaze from the common soldier to the man who would become legend and infamy, Lai Bu, a name carried on banners, whispered with awe, and eventually with fear. But before he was known as the Flying General, before he was called traitor, warlord, and brute, he was simply a man, flesh and blood, ambitious, skilled, and profoundly alone. He was born in the year 160 CE in the Bing province north of the empire's heart. This was frontier land where the winds ran dry and long, and where loyalty was often determined not by law, but by strength. Lai Bu's early life is poorly recorded, like most men who weren't born into privilege. But what little survives tells us he was exceptional from a young age. He excelled in archery and horsemanship, skills vital in the north, where survival depended on swift strikes and swift retreats. Horses were everything, and Lai Bu had a reputation for mastering them. He rode with uncanny control. His arrows flew fast and straight. His swordplay was deadly and precise. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a spectacle. Imagine Lai Bu in his youth, riding hard across open fields, spear in hand, banner trailing behind. A man so fast in combat that enemies said he flew. That's where the name came from, Flying General. And yet, for all his glory on the battlefield, Lai Bu's story isn't one of triumph. It's one of shifting loyalty, ambition, and isolation. He first rose to prominence under the warlord Ding Yuan, a regional commander who recognized Lai Bu's talent and gave him a place at his side. In another life, perhaps this partnership would have lasted, but history had other plans, because soon Lai Bu met another man, Dong Zhuo. Dong Zhuo was powerful, calculating, and ruthless. When the young Emperor Xiao proved too weak to rule, Dong Zhuo seized control of the court, placing a puppet emperor on the throne and making himself regent. But power, as always, demands protection, and for that, he needed someone like Lu Bu. Dong Zhuo offered gifts, wealth, horses, promises, and one very specific gift, a legendary steed known as Red Hare, a horse that could run 1,000 li in a single day, a symbol of status, of power. Lai Bu accepted, and in a single act of betrayal, he murdered his own adoptive father, Ding Yuan, and pledged loyalty to Dong Zhuo. It was the first betrayal, but not the last. You might imagine Lai Bu pacing the palace corridors in Chang'an, clad in lacquered armor, his weapon glinting softly under lantern light. A man praised for his strength, but distrusted by those who understood what he had done to gain his place. Even Dong Zhuo grew wary. Dong Zhuo may have controlled the court, but his cruelty made enemies of the nobles and generals. Whispers turned into plots, and one of those plots involved Lai Bu. The court official Wang Yun, skilled in rhetoric and manipulation, saw opportunity in Lai Bu's restlessness. He planted seeds of doubt, turning Lai Bu's thoughts against Dong Zhuo. He appealed not just to ambition, but to disgust, because Dong Zhuo was not kind, he was not just, and he treated Lai Bu with growing contempt, like a pawn to be moved, then discarded. Some say the final straw involved Diaokan, a woman of rare beauty. Legends say she was placed between Lai Bu and Dong Zhuo like a flame between dry leaves. She spoke sweetly to one, then the other, played on jealousy, on pride. The truth is clouded, but the result was murder. La Bu turned on Dong Juo just as he had turned on Ding Yuan. He entered the palace, struck, and ended the regent's life. In return, he was rewarded, briefly. But trust, once broken, rarely mends. La Bu's reputation spread not as a savior, but as a man willing to kill his own lords. He was feared, admired, and shunned. He drifted between allegiances, joining one warlord after another, only to be cast out when it suited him. He battled in the north, in the east. He took cities, then lost them. He married. He fathered children. But he never found a place to call his own. His most infamous clash came with Cao Cao, another rising power who saw in La Bu both a threat and a tool. La Bu, of course, could not be contained. He betrayed Cao Cao too, taking the city of Xiapi and attempting to rule it as his own. For a time it seemed as though he might rise again, but Cao Cao was patient and relentless. He laid siege to Xiapi, cut off supplies, isolated La Bu, and waited. The siege was long, food ran low, morale broke, and eventually La Bu was captured. Bound in chains, he was brought before Qiu Cao. There are stories of that meeting, of Liu Bu pleading for his life, of promising loyalty once again, of saying, "Bind me and use me, I will be your warhorse." But Cao Cao, remembering what happened to Ding Yuan and Dong Juo, simply shook his head. La Bu was executed soon after, and just like that, the flying general was grounded forever. No army left, no banners, no legacy but that of betrayal and raw, unmatched strength. And yet, his name endures. Why? Why does La Bu continue to fascinate, to divide opinion, even centuries later? For that, we look deeper not just at what he did, but how the world saw him fall. Segment 3. The mystery of the flying general's fall from grace. There are figures in history who remain as vivid in memory as they were in life. Not because they ruled longest, not because they built empires, but because they burned too brightly and then disappeared. La Bu is one of those men. He was called the Flying General, a warrior whose skills were unmatched, whose reputation sent other armies into retreat before the first strike. His name was etched into the minds of those who saw him fight, his form fluid, his weapon dancing, his horse seeming to carry him above the earth. But why, then, did such a man fall? Why did he die alone, in chains, abandoned by the very men he fought alongside? Tonight, let us wander through the soft fog of history and trace the quieter, deeper questions that surround La Bu. Not just what he did, but why he did it. Not just how he lost everything, but how he became a mystery, even to those who knew him best. Let us begin with the simple truth. La Bu never belonged. From the very beginning, he was an outsider, born in Bing province far to the north. In a land of harsh winds and hard men, he grew up in a place where survival depended on strength, not status. He wasn't the son of a noble. He wasn't raised in the courtly traditions of the capital. He didn't speak with the gentle affect of the gentry or trade letters with scholars. He learned with his body, with his eyes, with instinct. He became strong because the world gave him no other choice. But there is a loneliness in that. A man who grows without roots learns to run. And La Bu ran between allegiances, between patrons, between dreams. His first great act of betrayal, the murder of his adoptive father Ding Yuan, was a choice. A painful one, a calculated one, and one that marked him forever. Some say he did it for power. Some say he was manipulated, offered red hair, the legendary steed, and seduced by the glitter of Dong Zhuo's court. Others believe he acted from resentment, or fear, or both. But regardless of the reason, he set a precedent. From that moment forward, Lu Bu would be known not just for his strength, but for his disloyalty. And disloyalty is a brand that never fades. Imagine for a moment the world he entered. The Han Dynasty, once mighty, was splintering. Warlords rose like weeds after summer rain. Alliances formed, broke, and reformed within months. The court at Luxing was in turmoil, and men like Dong Zhuo seized power in the chaos. This was not a world for the pure of heart. It was a world for survivors. Lu Bu was just a survivor. But survival alone does not build legacy. It does not build trust. In the years that followed, he turned on Dong Zhuo, his second adoptive father, just as he had turned on the first. He moved from province to province, taking shelter under various warlords: Yuan Shu, Yuan Shao, Liu Bei, Zhang Yang, always admired, always welcomed, until he wasn't. They praised his martial skill. They marveled at his courage. But none dared keep him close for long, because each man asked the same question in the quiet of their tent. If he betrayed the others, why would he not betray me? And Lu Bu gave them reason to fear. Time and again, he acted without warning, took cities that were not his, executed men without consulting allies, dismissed strategy in favor of action. He was not cruel, but he was reckless. He relied on strength and strength alone. And in that choice, we find the core of the mystery, because in many ways, Lu Bu was a creature of a fading world. Once perhaps a general could rise on skill alone when war was fought in open fields, when valor mattered more than logistics. But the Han Dynasty's collapse ushered in a new age, one of diplomacy, of scheming, of carefully measured loyalty. An age of men like Cao, subtle, shrewd, deeply strategic. Lu Bu did not fit, and yet he lingered. He always found new allies, new followers, new chances, because people wanted to believe in strength. They wanted to believe that a man who rode red hair and fought like thunder might be the one to restore order. But strength is only half the story. In the end, Lu Bu failed, not because others betrayed him, but because he gave them every reason to. There is a tragic irony to his downfall. When Cao laid siege to Xiapi, Lu Bu could have fled. He could have fought. He could have rallied. But his men didn't. They surrendered. And what's most telling is not that they surrendered to save themselves, but that they surrendered willingly in exchange for peace. Lu Bu had led with the sword, but he had not inspired the heart. And when the sword dulled, the heart was gone. When he was dragged before Cao, bound, humbled, exhausted, he offered one last bargain, a plea. "Bind me," he said. "Use me as your horse. I will fight for you." But Cao, clever as ever, looked at the broken man before him and said simply, "You would kill me as you killed Dong Zhuo." And so it ended. A blade, a fall, a silence, but still, the mystery endures. Why do we remember him? Why do you, lying in bed centuries later, still hear his name? Perhaps it is because Lu Bu represents something raw, something real. He was not perfect, he was not wise, but he was powerful and flawed and undeniably human. He burned bridges, yes, but only because he ran so fast that he didn't believe they'd be needed again. He rode a horse so fast they said it could fly. He fought with such ferocity they said no 10 men could match him. And he lived in such a way that even when he fell, he could not be erased. Perhaps in the quiet part of us, we recognize the loneliness of such a life. We see the child in the northern plains, the youth who wanted to rise, the warrior who had no one left to protect him. And in that, we understand. Segment 4, Feasting at a Warlord's Court. Labu's final hours of glory. Imagine yourself inside the warm glow of a warlord's hall. Outside, the night settles slowly over Shuzhou. The spring air is cool with the scent of damp stone and distant river reed. The moon is soft, its silver light scattered across rooftops and courtyards. From the city walls to the merchant stalls, the streets are mostly quiet. A few scattered voices drift on the breeze. But here, within the thick stone walls of Lu Bu's stronghold, the mood is different. Inside the main hall, a feast is underway. The floor is swept. The tables are arranged with precision, low and wide, surrounded by cushions for reclining. At the far end of the room, Labu sits alone at the head table. No one else occupies that space, not even his closest officers. His posture is strong but composed. He does not fidget. He doesn't lean forward. He does not smile, but his eyes move, constantly, watching, measuring. He is dressed not for war, but for honor. His ceremonial robe is deep crimson with delicate black patterns of dragons curling along the hem. Over one shoulder rests a cloak of embroidered silk, weighed slightly by the crest of his household, newly minted, recently won. It is a rare thing to see Labu still. For most of his life he has been in motion, on horseback, on the battlefield, in the saddle, always in the saddle. He has ridden across half of China, and now for once he sits in a place that is his, or so it seems. The hall flickers with lantern light. Bronze censers burn slowly, trailing thin threads of fragrant smoked cassia bark and pine resin mixed with sandalwood. It's a scent that clings lightly to everything, to robes, to armor, to memory. Musicians sit in one corner of the room, plucking strings, striking tuned stones, and coaxing whispers from flutes of bamboo. The melodies are low and steady, never fast, never sharp. They move like a slow river, curling around conversations, keeping the room in rhythm. The guests arrive in small groups. Minor lords, local magistrates, military envoys, emissaries of uncertain loyalty. They enter quietly, bow respectfully, and take their places. Their words are careful. Their eyes flick toward Labu, then away. They all know who he is. They all know what he's done. They all know the price of sitting too close to a man whose history is a map of shifting allegiances and bloody upheavals. But for now, none of that matters. For now, it is a celebration. There's food, an endless procession of platters and steaming bowls brought in by silent attendants. Roasted duck, lacquered in sweet plum glaze. Braised lamb with garlic shoots and ginger. Lotus root sliced into coins, stir-fried in sesame oil. Pickled radish, boiled millet, soft buns stuffed with ground pork and scallion. Everything is prepared with care. Even the rice is fragrant, cooked with chrysanthemum petals and garnished with finely chopped herbs. The wine, too, is of good stock, not the thick, cloudy mash served to soldiers, but clarified huangshu poured into lacquered cups. Labu drinks sparingly. He's not one to indulge. One hand remains on the edge of the table, fingers tapping in time with some rhythm only he hears, perhaps a tune from long ago, perhaps the beat of war drums only he remembers. He watches the hall more than he enjoys it. The laughter is soft, the jokes are cautious. Conversations drift around alliances, tribute, weather, supply routes, but underneath it all, a layer of unease hums gently. No one forgets that Lo Bu took this city by force, that Liu Bei was driven out, not negotiated with, that his reign began, as so many of his victories did, in sudden violence. Even the most gracious guest here smiling, toasting, offering flattery, keeps one eye open. Labu, for his part, accepts the compliments, but says little. He nods, he raises his cup, and once in a while he speaks. When he does, the hall stills. His voice is low, composed, but unmistakably commanding. He asks about grain supplies, about border patrols, about the strength of nearby garrisons. No talk of poetry, no flowery praise. Lei Bu was never a scholar, never a man of refinement. He commands through presence, not polish. And yet there's something strangely poetic about this scene. Here's a man born on the fringes of empire, a man who murdered his own adoptive father, who betrayed the man who gave him a kingdom, who fought his way across provinces, burned bridges in every direction, and still found a way to sit here on a throne of his own making. There's beauty in that, and sorrow too, because even in this moment of power there is no comfort. His daughter, whom he recently married to a rival's son to secure an alliance, is not here. His wife dines in another chamber. His most trusted officer, a man named Gao Shun, sits quietly, saying little. They both know how fragile this feast is, how temporary. The room is filled with food, and yet it feels hungry. Hungry for certainty, hungry for trust, hungry for permanence. Labu knows this. He doesn't expect loyalty. He doesn't expect love. He expects obedience, and little else. Some say that even now, in this moment of peace, he could sense the end creeping in. Outside the city, word was spreading. Cao Cao was preparing a campaign, a real one. No longer a skirmish between lords, but a siege, a reckoning. An army built not just to defeat, but to erase. But for this one night, La Bu dines without a blade in hand. He watches dancers move across the floor swaying to the slow beat of drums, their sleeves drifting like wind through reeds. He eats slowly, drinks less, says little. A man with much behind him and little ahead. As the feast winds down, the guests begin to leave. They bow again, deeply, always deeply. They offer thanks, shallow praise, empty oaths. Labu listens, but whether he believes them, no one knows. Soon the music stops. The torches dim. The hall empties. Only a few remain. The guards by the doors, a servant collecting dishes, a single musician slowly packing away their instrument. Lo Bu rises. He moves like a man used to wait. Not just armor, but expectation. Regret. Unfinished battles. Unforgiven choices. He says nothing as he walks the length of the hall, his boots silent on smooth stone. The night wind meets him at the doors, cool and clear. Outside, red hair waits in the stables, calm, still, the only creature he trusts without question. Perhaps that is why he remains quiet, because he knows peace like this doesn't last, because he's seen how quickly wine turns bitter, how swiftly feasts turn into farewells, how often thrones become execution stones. This was a last great feast of Lo Bu's life. Soon siege engines would arrive, betrayals would bloom, and the curtain would fall. But for this moment, for this quiet, golden night, he was more than a warrior. He was a man at the height of his story, not yet defeated, not yet betrayed, just still. And now, as the light fades and the court empties into silence, we prepare to leave this chapter behind. Conclusion. The echoes of Lo Bu, and now the fire has gone out. The hall is empty. The banners are down. The sword once raised so high is silent. Lo Bu is gone. The man whose name once caused armies to hesitate, whose horse was the envy of every cavalryman, whose spear struck faster than thought itself, is now a story, a name in old texts, a figure passed between storytellers and scholars, a legend reshaped again and again. But if you listen closely, you can still hear his echo, not in the roar of battle, but in the quiet places, in the wind that stirs the grass across forgotten fields, in the soft creak of leather armor long packed away, in the memory of a man who rose through blood and dust, reached for power, and fell. His legacy is not simple. It was never meant to be. He was both feared and admired, brave but reckless, loyal but only for a while, brilliant in battle but adrift in peace. He betrayed those who trusted him, and in the end was betrayed in turn. Some remember Lo Bu as a brute, others as a tragic figure. Most agree on one thing: there was never another like him. And now, as you lie in bed safe, still, wrapped in the calm of the present, let the distant echoes of Li Bu's world fade. You no longer walk the muddy roads of ancient China. You no longer sleep with one eye open in a tent near the riverbank. You no longer raise a spear in the service of a fading dynasty. The past is still now. The battles have ended. The storm has passed. All that remains is rest. So take a deep breath. Let your mind drift. And sleep well, knowing that the story of Lo Bu, like all stories, has come to its quiet close. Thank you for spending this time with us. And if you enjoyed this gentle journey through history, we invite you softly, without urgency, to like this video and subscribe to Boring History for Sleep. There are many more stories waiting, patiently, quietly, to be told. Good night, and sleep deeply.